I used to watch a lot of casting demonstrations, and I've got to admit that many of those demonstrations didn't really settle on me. My mind was full of rubbish. Part of the rubbish was just dark Derbyshire thoughts, thinking he's got a special rod, those sort of thoughts. And I found it difficult to equate the sort of fancy pants casting I sometimes saw with the sort of casting that I was doing myself. It didn't help by the fact I was actually catching some fish at the time. I was self-taught back in the day, and I used to cast like just about everyone else casts, using a wristy sort of stroke like this. If you just cock your wrist round, it's quite possible to make a loop, and if you have some loose line to shoot, you can let some line shoot as well. Perfectly far enough to catch a fish, but I think that proper serious casting doesn't just wag the rod round, because if you wag the rod round, you're not making best use of the rod. Let me show you what I mean. If we were teaching ourselves to fire a bow and arrow, fire an arrow from a bow, we wouldn't put our arrow right up the top there, would we? We put it further down. And if we just cast with a wristy stroke like that, we kind of make our loop unwind, say it's on a back cast like that. But if I just pull the weight against the tip of the rod, it obviously stores some energy there. We can see it's got some stored energy, it will go. However, if I move the butt of the rod and not just the tip of the rod, look what happens. The whole thing bends. And if it bends deeper, it will come back with more force. So I've got to move my hand quicker to keep in front of that and accelerate and accelerate and accelerate to a sudden stop. A sudden stop doesn't imply you've got to cast your shirt off. It can be quite a gentle movement. But look again, that bends the tip of the rod. That's what you get just bending your wrist. But that bends the whole of the rod. And that's what you get if you make a straightish hand movement. I say ish, there's all sorts of variations on it. That for me is the secret of fly casting. How it seems to work is that if you've got your line on the water, if you just lift your rod up steadily and accelerate to a stop about there. When you have stopped about there, just check that. If you've got about 2 fingers gap there, that's fine. The self-taught angler has got a built-in tendency to go too far back with their wrist, opening that gap out and catching a sheep's bum on your back cast. Most annoying. A lot of people have problems stopping there and stopping the wrist. It can take a lot of learning and it feels unnatural. There's a couple of different grips you might want to use which can help. One of them is if you put the rod across the base of your fingers, and crook your thumb over the top, it leaves an air gap. A slightly different grip, which does much the same effect, puts the base of the cork handle right in the heel of your hand, flat like that, and then put one finger 1/3 of the way round, crook it slightly, and then your thumb 1/3 of the way round and wrap the rest of your fingers round. That looks a slightly weird grip, that. It looks like the claw of Fu Manchu. However, it does put a block on your wrist. Turning round the other way, in practical terms, you should really get the line under tension or moving. It doesn't actually have to be in a straight line, theoretically, but it does have to be under tension. If it's in a mess and no fish feeding on your fly, you could pick it up like that. As long as you accelerate it to a stop, you can get some pretty good casts. Ideally though, a beginner might want to start with it straight, and you lift until the end of the fly line is about to break free, and then you speed up and stop, and try to stop the same instant the fly leaves the surface. That gives us a nice clean high back cast, hopefully, and avoids the indignity of catching a sheep's bum. I'll do it again. Start low, lift, 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 speed up and stop, speed up and stop. We want it to go high if we're casting overhead. I've actually got someone who's training up to be a professional tutor at the moment, and he's been struggling a bit to try and find the words how to teach naturally for him. We all teach in a slightly different way. But he was a driving instructor for many years, and his words the way around it, he describes it as first gear, second, third, fourth, emergency stop. And I think that's not a bad way of working it, really. Every day is a school day. First, second, third, emergency stop. And I think that's a pretty good description. It feels a bit unnatural because there's a bit of an elbow lift with it. Some people can't do it. Some people will pick up and do a cast called a false cast, perfectly good, and instead of just letting the line go, they give a sort of mighty forward lurch on their last cast. That's a bad casting fault. I know one chap chucked the top of his rod off doing that. And I think it's a conceptual thing. If you think of your line as unrolling a bit like a tank tread, unrolling high towards the target and then landing gently, I think that's a good way of doing it instead of casting and doing a big lurch. One reason people do lurch forward, I think, is that they've got some kind of back or leg injury and they're off balance, and if they're asking their body to do something up here, their body thinks they're falling over, so the hand's going out to stop them. One way round it is to put your right toe in front of you if you're casting right-handed. It puts a block on you, stops you falling in the river maybe. But another way, if you just kind of shift your weight consciously from your heels to your toes and then maybe bend your legs a bit, you've got to convince your body that you're not actually going to fall over. So if you've got a back, leg, any kind of lower body injury, it might be that subconsciously you are using your shoulders to balance with, and something fast happening makes you think you're falling over. So if you've got a lurch, just try planting your feet maybe and try deliberately making yourself on balance. You could practice casting sitting down. That's a useful thing to do. I'm just going to round off this little segment with one or two of my favourite river casts. It's not comprehensive by any means, but one of the big problems novices have when they come fresh to a river fishing situation is that if you spend hours and hours trying to cast a nice straight line on a river, within moments your fly starts to skate round on the surface. Can you see how it's dragging across the surface there? I'm not so foolish as to say that fish won't take a skating or dragged fly. Sometimes making it drag a little bit deliberately can make a fish grab your fly. Just twitch your rod a bit. But mostly, if your fly skates round, fish won't take it. So casting a nice straight line might not be any good. If you learn to cast a line which opens in the air and lands with a bit of slack on the end is good. This is one of my favourites. Just stop the rod high and let it parachute down with a bit of slack behind it and hold the rod up. And if stopping the rod high and letting it fall out the sky works, or reaching it upstream works, the opposite must work as well. Sometimes we go back to the bad cast scenario. You know, when a beginner goes back too far and up too high, sometimes if you can do that deliberately, you can get a real load of slack right at the far end of your fly. So it all lands in a big heap. it looks awful, but you get a lot more drag-free drift. If your fly is on the dangle underneath your own bank, if you've got enough space to lift up and some space above you, there's a funny little casting trick you can do to get your line out in front of you. It seems to work best if you turn the rod upside down, turning my wrist round and popping it straight out again. If your fly is across on the other side of some fast flowing water, if you make a conventional cast, it can make your fly skid and it can drown your fly. It can put your fly under the water. It can drown your fly through the fast water. So sometimes some anglers like to sort of bounce the fly off, and they go like that. And they just send a series of bounces down, and it seems to pick it up quite clearly. Or if your line's in a mess, you could just pick it up slowly. Maybe send some circles down. But if you are going to circle it round and off, do it the other way next couple of times, saves you twisting your fly line. If I cast directly upstream, there, if a fish takes the fly, if I've got a big loop of line underneath my rod tip there, I've got to go all the way up there to try and hook a fish. Yeah? That loop of line there underneath the rod tip is deadly. So if you do make a cast upstream, you must point the rod at the fly, just strip it in, keep pace with it, and then just cockle the rod back and just do a little roll cast in the air and pop it back out again. Don't just keep pulling in, because if you pull too much line in, you've got to faff about doing false casts and feeding line out. You've got to make 5 or 6 movements to get out. If you're casting across really fast flowing currents, we do sometimes need to throw a lot of slack line. I think probably the most accurate way, although we've done a reach cast and a parachute cast, is just curve the rod slightly. All I'm doing there, I'm just bending my arm round like that. I'm trying to make the tip of the rod do the same. And that can sometimes give me an accurate cast for direction, but just put a gentle curve upstream of where the fly lands. It does take practice, that one. And your basic casting stroke, you can't do it if your basic casting stroke's doing that sort of thing. I'll try and do it towards you over your head if you want. Yeah, I am insured. Curve. 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 Gentle, subtle curve. It can make you just enough difference. Sometimes you're in a position when you've sort of brought your fly in to change it, maybe, and you're surrounded by all sorts of foliage. There's a little trick you can do. It's more or less very similar to one I already showed you, but you can, if you've got your fly in your hand, turn your rod upside down, flick it straight up in the air and then let it pop out. It said a gut casting instructor could do one of their own initials across a river. My middle name is Wilberforce.